Hello friends, my name is Miranda. Welcome to my universe. Today I'm going to be talking about every single book that I have read so far this year. I love making videos like this, and at the end of this week, keep your eyes peeled because I will be posting my mid-year book freakout tag where I will go into greater detail of the books that I have read, my new favorite authors, favorite characters, different things like that. But in today's video, I'm just going to go briefly over every single book I've read, give you a brief synopsis, and then I will also be giving you my star rating so you can kind of get a feel on how I felt about the book. My end goal for 2023 is to have finished reading 50 books. That is the goal, and I am a little ahead of schedule. I am doing really great. This year actually has been an amazing reading year. Not only have I read some of the most amazing books that I have read in my entire life, I also have discovered a lot of new authors, and it's just been a lot of fun. I have read a total of 28 books so far in the past 6 months. So let's get started. I will be going in order of when I finished the books. So I'm going to first start with the first book I finished this year, and then I will end with the book that I finished just yesterday. We are starting off with a bang with one of my favorite authors for a very long time. I absolutely love this author, and this book was a 5-star read for me, so that was a great start as well. I read Gilded by Marissa Meyer. This is the first book in a duology. It is a Rumpelstiltskin retelling. So it was lighthearted because it is a young adult book, but at the same time it was a lot darker than most of Marissa Meyer's other books, so it was a bit refreshing getting that side of her writing as well. I told you I had a good start to this year, and I wasn't lying. The second book I finished was another 5-star book by another one of my favorite authors, Fairy Tale by Stephen King. I have a very in-depth review on this book. Stephen King wrote about our charming main character who goes into an alternate universe, kind of alternate world. It is a fantasy world, and he has to become basically the prince and save the people that are suffering there. It was fun seeing Stephen King's take on a fairy tale and how he was able to have a different voice, but at the same time keep true to a lot of his own literary devices he tends to use a lot in his horror books. The third book I read this year is Cursed by Marissa Meyer. This is the second book to Gilded. I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars. This just continues on the story and adds a little bit more depth. It wasn't just Rumpelstiltskin anymore. I would say that Gilded was heavy on the Rumpelstiltskin retelling, and Cursed was more of Marissa Meyer's freedom and what she put into the world herself and the different twists that she added to it. All right, the next book took a big turn and started me off on a whole other adventure that I am still going on. I read The Hobbit by Tolkien. This was a 5 out of 5 star book. Spoiler alert, I have yet to read a book by Tolkien that is less than 5 stars. I'm not going to explain The Hobbit because I feel like it's pretty self-explanatory and a lot of you probably already know what this book is about, but I fell in love with Bilbo Baggins, fell in love with the dwarves, with the world that Tolkien had created. I loved that it was a children's story, and this really set me up very well to go into the rest of the Lord of the Rings with just big open eyes, so excited to go on a continual journey with new characters. The 5th book I read this year is A Curse So Dark and Lonely by Bridget Kemmerer. I really liked this book. This is a young adult retelling of Beauty and the Beast. I really love Beauty and the Beast. That is probably one of my favorite fairy tales just in general. I gave this book 5 stars, really loved it. Next up, I finished Salem's Lot by Stephen King. Now, listen, hear me out. This was actually a 3-star book for me. I was not a huge fan, which is very upsetting and very different than what I was expecting because I had always heard a lot of praise for this book, being one of Stephen King's first novels ever to be published. And so I was very highly expectant, and it just didn't deliver. This is a story about vampires in a small town, and this small town goes into destruction because of the vampires. You know, nothing much else to say about that. And alas, after that slight disappointment, I read another disappointment. A Heart So Fierce and Broken, the second book to A Curse So Dark and Lonely. I gave this book, I believe, 3 stars. No, I gave this book 2 stars. I was not a fan at all I think the first book was so much better than this one. I ended up not finishing the series. This was where I cut it off, obviously. I gave it 2 stars. I just feel like this one, in comparison to the first book, did not do anything for me. The 8th book I read this year was the first book in Crescent City, A House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas. I have a video on this, so I don't really feel like I need to get into too much detail, but this was a disappointment. There was a lot of things in here that physically made me cringe and want to vomit. I do love the world that Sarah J. Maas created. The issues I had were just tiny little issues throughout the reading experience. It wasn't like there were huge things that I had an issue with. However, the little things do add up as time goes on, and so I felt like I was just suffocating under so many things. I love the relationship in this book, though. I think it is very genuinely healthy, the way that they cope and work through things together, and I loved the character development, and the world building is beautiful, but you can watch my video if you want deeper thoughts. All right, the next book I finished was The Fellowship of the Ring by Tolkien. I'm reading all of them in it all in one, so you'll see this book a few times. But The Fellowship of the Ring was 5 stars. Once again. Merry and Pippin are some of my favorite characters now. I just absolutely am in love with this world, and I can't believe I didn't start this series sooner. That's all I'm gonna say. The 10th book I read is a really good one. The Outsider by Stephen King. I really like this one. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. The Outsider is about a strange case where a man is supposedly in 2 places at once, but alas, that is not possible. So we follow around Detective Ralph Anderson, love him, as well as Holly Gibney as they try to crack this case and figure out what really happened. These last 3 books are a part of a series that was honestly just a little bit heart-wrenching for me in all of the wrong ways. I read The Curse Workers by Holly Black, and that consists of White Cat being the first one, the second book is Red Glove, and the last book is Black Heart. This is a young adult series, and the magic system is very difficult to explain. My issue with this series was that it was all over the place. I did not feel really connected with the characters. I think that the first book is the strongest. However, the good parts did not outweigh the bad parts in any sense. All right, the rest of the books I'm going to talk to you about today are bangers, so buckle up. The next book I finished after The Curse Workers was The Black Phone by Joe Hill. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. This short story is fantastic. I could go on and on about it, but basically it follows around this child. I believe he's 12 or 13, and he gets kidnapped by a man in a mask. The rest of the short story is just the readers following around our main character as he tries to escape and figure out how to get rid of the guy who kidnapped him. I loved this. I also loved the movie. The next short story I read, next book / short story I read, is The Boogeyman by Stephen King. I gave this one 4 out of 5 stars as well. Most of these books I'm talking about today I have videos on, so you could probably easily find more details on my channel about them and about my thoughts, but The Boogeyman is pretty great. I did like the movie more than the book because the book takes place just throughout the duration of a therapy session. The short story follows around this man as he explains to his therapist what had happened to his 3 children and how he thinks that it is the act of the boogeyman. Dun dun dun! The next book I finished takes a whole different turn. I read Out of the Silent Planet by C.S. Lewis. I borrowed this book from a friend and I absolutely loved it. I know that it's a series of 3. I have not read the rest of the series though, but in this book we follow around this man as he discovers a new planet. What is really fascinating about this book is C.S. Lewis wrote it before we really knew or understood what outer space looked like. So immersive, so beautiful. I loved it. I really enjoyed seeing a completely different way of looking at outer space. The 17th book that I finished this year is The Divine Romance by Jean Edwards. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. This one is difficult to describe because the genre can be considered multiple genres. It's a very poetic read, but at the same time it is a description of how God created man and how much he loves man. I loved this one. It is fairly short as well, so it was very easy to get through, and I love poetry so much, so I felt like this book was really a love story. And the next book I read is kind of in the same vein. I read Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. This one took me quite some time to get through just because of how many bombs he drops in this and how many quotes. Very deep, philosophical, soul-searching things are discussed in this book. He really makes you think a lot about what you believe and why you believe it. And this book is truly just on surface level a book about why Christians believe what they believe. But there's also so many deeper layers to it that I really loved. On a totally unrelated note, I read Shawshank Redemption by Stephen King. What do you know? This was another 5 out of 5 star read. I also watched the movie. Holy freaking crap. What a watch. If you don't know what Shawshank Redemption is about, it is about this man that enters a prison and he was wrongfully imprisoned. And so it kind of goes along with his story and the friends that he makes in the prison and how he builds himself up. All right, and then the 20th book that I read this year is none other than The Two Towers by Tolkien. I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars as well. What do you know? That was totally a surprise to all of us. I'm someone who generally really enjoys the middle book of a series, which is why if the middle book sucks, it's a big disappointment for me. And Two Towers totally delivered, totally carried on the rest of the story, added so much more depth to it that the Fellowship didn't have yet, even though it did have a very solid foundation. Smeagol! The next 3 books I read in Europe, right back to back to back. And I gave each of them 4 out of 5 stars. We have The Kingdom of the Wicked. This is the first book. And then the second book is Kingdom of the Cursed. And then finally we have Kingdom of the Feared. All of these are by Carrie Maniscalco. This one is more of an adult fantasy series. It's definitely a dark romance as well. This story takes place in a world full of witches and demons and dark rulers. It is a pretty good series. It just was very dark and has a lot of emphasis on demons and hell, sin, and the different types of sins, which I actually really thought that was great as well, because Carrie did go through, you know, like, these are not exactly great and this is not exactly a great place to be. But I think that there was too much emphasis on it for my personal liking, but overall the story is really great and the characters are definitely well developed. All right, and then we have the 24th book that I read this year. This one just rocked my entire world and I'm rereading it, so I have a bookmark in it. I can't even believe that this is physically in my hands right now, because for those of you who are well aware of what is going on in the book world, this book is completely sold out of every place until August. We have Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, and I freaking got my hands on a first edition somehow. Truly, my prayers were answered. Like, honestly, it was like a miracle that I even got this. But I'm rereading it, so I'm going to be giving a in-depth review on this very soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that. Fourth Wing is a young adult / adult. It has a lot of themes from both genres. This is such a fantastical world and has so many layers that this first book doesn't even touch, man. Like, you learn about the riders who ride the dragons, you learn a little bit about the scribes that learn to keep track of the archives that have all of the history of their peoples, you learn about the different fantastical beasts that are in this story, and you learn about the healers. There's a lot of very cutthroat, bloody scenes in this as well. It reminds me a lot of the Hunger Games because it is very dark and gloomy in that same way, kind of like these people who are in the same situation turning against each other. But at the same time, there are the quadrants, so it reminds me a lot of Divergent, and then as well as How to Train Your Dragon, because there is a huge, heavy emphasis on the riders being a very important part of the society. Reading this book was nostalgic for me in a way, but also it is something so new and creative. I ate it up. All right, and then the next book I finished this year is If It Bleeds by Stephen King. I am planning on filming a review for this book very, very soon. Basically, this is a collection of 4 short stories by Stephen King that he compiled together, and they each are very different. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. All right, and then we're on the final 3 books that I have finished as of late. I reread The Inheritance Games by Jennifer Lynn Barnes. I also reread The Hawthorne Legacy, and then I finally picked up The Final Gambit, which is the 3rd book in the series, and I just finished this one last night. All 3 of these books are 5 out of 5 stars for me. I love this series a lot. It's very lighthearted. This is a young adult mystery series all about this young girl who inherits the 8th richest man in the United States inheritance, and she didn't even know the guy. This whole entire story follows around our main character as she tries to figure out why she was chosen for the inheritance, as well as the different puzzles and mysteries that the old man left behind for her and the 4 grandsons, whom I am in love with. All of them, basically, for different reasons. They're really great. And with all of that being said, those were all 28 books that I have read so far this year. If you've read any of these books, please let me know as well. I would love to read about your own feelings about these, even if you disagree with me. Thank you all so much for watching and supporting my channel. I love you so much. Please be safe, make good choices, and I definitely will see you next time. Bye!